What if I told you the most famous queen in human history made a promise from beyond the grave, and for over 2,000 years, she kept it? Cleopatra the seventh reportedly declared that no man would ever find her tomb. For 20 centuries, she was right. Every archaeologist who searched came up empty. Every expedition failed. The greatest queen of the ancient world vanished without a trace, and nobody could explain how. Then a criminal defense lawyer from the Dominican Republic did something that changed everything. She followed a tunnel 43 feet underground, and at the end of it she found what the entire archaeological establishment said did not exist. There was even evidence that Cleopatra had orchestrated her own disappearance with engineering so advanced it took 2,000 years, and the man who discovered the Titanic to finally uncover it. This is what they found beneath the sands of Egypt, and why the answer is more extraordinary than the mystery itself. To understand why this discovery matters, you first have to understand why Cleopatra's tomb is the single most sought-after archaeological prize on the planet, and why finding it would shake the foundations of everything we think we know about the ancient world. Cleopatra VII was not what Hollywood taught you. She was not primarily a seductress or a romantic figure. She was a polyglot who spoke 9 languages fluently. Ancient sources describe her as a philosopher, a physician, a chemist, and a specialist in what we would now call cosmetology. She personally wrote scientific treatises. She commanded the wealthiest nation on Earth. And she did all of this in a world that had never seen a female ruler wield this kind of power. Born in 69 BCE into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek family that had ruled Egypt since the death of Alexander the Great, Cleopatra ascended to the throne at just 18 years old. But she did not inherit a stable kingdom. She inherited chaos. Her father had bankrupted the treasury. Her brother, who was also technically her co-ruler, and her husband, according to Egyptian custom, tried to have her killed and exiled her from Alexandria. Most rulers in that position would have disappeared from history entirely. Cleopatra did not disappear. She raised an army, smuggled herself into the palace of Julius Caesar, rolled inside a linen sack, and within hours had secured an alliance with the most powerful man on Earth. She was 21 years old. For the next 2 decades, she did not just rule Egypt. She played the 2 most powerful men in the Roman Republic against each other and nearly rewrote the entire map of the ancient world. Caesar fell first. Their alliance produced a son, Caesarion, and secured Egypt's independence. Cleopatra traveled to Rome itself and lived in a villa across the Tiber, where Roman society watched in equal parts fascination and horror as a foreign queen walked their streets with the authority of an empress. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra returned to Egypt and pivoted to Mark Antony, one of Rome's most powerful generals and a member of the ruling triumvirate. Their partnership was both romantic and strategic. Together, they had 3 children. Antony granted Egyptian control over vast territories across the eastern Mediterranean, including parts of modern-day Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Turkey. At the donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE, Antony publicly declared Caesarion to be the legitimate heir of Julius Caesar and distributed kingdoms among Cleopatra's children like playing cards. For a brief, extraordinary moment, it looked like Cleopatra might actually succeed in creating an empire that rivaled Rome itself, an Egyptian-led Mediterranean superpower with Alexandria as its capital. But there was a problem, and his name was Octavian. Caesar's adopted heir was only 32 years old, but he was cunning, ruthless, and utterly determined to destroy both Antony and Cleopatra. He launched a propaganda campaign portraying Antony as a man bewitched by a foreign queen, a traitor to Rome enslaved by Egyptian luxury. He read Antony's private will aloud to the Roman Senate, revealing that Antony had left his fortune to Cleopatra's children. Rome was outraged. The Senate declared war, not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra. A foreign queen made the perfect enemy. On September 2nd, 31 BCE, the 2 largest navies the ancient world had ever assembled collided off the coast of Greece at the Battle of Actium. Octavian brought 400 ships and 80,000 infantry. Antony and Cleopatra commanded 500 ships and 70,000 soldiers. The battle was brutal. Octavian's lighter, more maneuverable ships, commanded by his brilliant Admiral Agrippa, systematically dismantled Antony's heavier fleet. When Cleopatra saw the battle turning, she broke through the line with 60 Egyptian ships and fled toward Egypt. Antony, watching her sails disappear over the horizon, abandoned his own fleet and followed her. The remaining forces surrendered within a week. The most powerful couple in the ancient world had lost everything in a single afternoon. Here is where the story takes a turn that most people never hear about. Because what happened next was not just a tragedy, it was a carefully calculated act of defiance that would remain hidden for over 2,000 years. Octavian did not rush to Egypt immediately. He spent nearly a year consolidating power, marching his army overland through Asia to ensure none of Antony's allies could regroup. By the summer of 30 BCE, his forces arrived at the gates of Alexandria. Antony's remaining troops deserted. His cavalry switched sides. His navy surrendered without a fight. On August 1st, Antony received a false message that Cleopatra was dead. In despair, he stabbed himself with his sword. He did not die immediately. His servants carried him to the mausoleum where Cleopatra had barricaded herself, and he died in her arms. Now think carefully about what happened next, because this is where the official story starts to unravel. Octavian wanted Cleopatra alive. He wanted to drag her back to Rome in chains and parade her through the streets in a triumphal procession, the ultimate humiliation for the queen who had dared to challenge Rome. He sent his officer Gaius Proculeius to negotiate her surrender. But somewhere between August 1st and August 12th, 30 BCE, Cleopatra died. Ancient accounts say she allowed a poisonous asp to bite her. Other sources suggest she used a toxic ointment or a poison hidden in a hairpin. Modern scholars still debate whether she killed herself or whether Octavian had her murdered and staged it as a suicide. But here is the detail that haunts researchers to this day. The ancient writer Plutarch recorded that Octavian allowed Cleopatra and Mark Antony to be buried together. Their tomb was said to be grand, near a temple of Isis. But Octavian also ordered the execution of Caesarion, Cleopatra's son, by Julius Caesar, eliminating the last rival to his claim as Caesar's heir. And then he did something calculated and devastating. He systematically destroyed images of Cleopatra across Egypt. Fewer than 10 statues of her survive today. He wanted her erased from history, and then her tomb simply vanished. For 2,000 years, not a single archaeologist, treasure hunter, or explorer could locate the burial of the most famous woman in the ancient world. Napoleon scholars looked for it. Victorian explorers searched. 20th century expeditions with modern equipment came up empty. The leading theory placed it somewhere in Alexandria's royal quarter, the area where her palace once stood. But there was a devastating problem. In 365 CE, one of the most powerful earthquakes in recorded Mediterranean history struck the Egyptian coast, triggering a tsunami that swept across Alexandria with catastrophic force. Entire districts of the ancient city slid beneath the waves. The royal quarter, where Cleopatra's palace had stood, was submerged beneath 20 feet of salt water. Today, divers can swim through the ruins of the ancient royal complex, past toppled columns and shattered statues, but the tomb has never been found among them. If Cleopatra was buried in the royal quarter, the sea took her, but what if she was never there in the first place? What if the queen who outsmarted Rome's greatest generals had one final strategy, executed from beyond the grave? What if Cleopatra planned her own disappearance with the same strategic brilliance she had applied to everything else in her extraordinary life? That question consumed a woman named Kathleen Martinez for an entire decade before she ever picked up a shovel. Martinez was not an archaeologist. She was a criminal defense lawyer in Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic. Her father, Fausto Martinez, a legal scholar, owned the largest private library in the country. Every week, he brought his daughter new books and required her to sit with him and discuss what she had learned. This was not casual bedtime reading. This was rigorous intellectual training that began in childhood and never stopped. By age 10, she had fallen in love with ancient Egypt. She had skipped grades in elementary school. By adulthood, she had earned a degree in archaeology alongside her law career. But her obsession with Cleopatra went deeper than academic curiosity. She believed that history had been profoundly unfair to Egypt's last queen. The Roman propaganda machine had reduced one of the most brilliant rulers in history to a seductive villain. For 2,000 years, the story of Cleopatra had been told exclusively by the men who destroyed her. Martinez decided she would find Cleopatra's tomb and set the record straight. As she would later put it, history is written by the winner. She intended to give the loser a voice. She spent 10 years studying Cleopatra's life and death before ever approaching Egypt's government. 10 years of reading ancient texts in their original languages, 10 years of cross-referencing Roman accounts with Egyptian records and finding the contradictions. And she approached the problem the way a criminal lawyer would, by reconstructing the crime scene. Her reasoning was devastatingly logical. Cleopatra knew Octavian was coming. She knew he wanted to capture her alive. She knew he would desecrate her memory if given the chance. A queen this intelligent, this strategic, would not leave her eternal resting place in the one location the Romans would obviously search first. She would hide it. Martinez asked a simple question that no one else had thought to ask. Where could Cleopatra have reached from Alexandria within a single day that was connected to her identity as the living incarnation of the goddess Isis, that was outside Roman control, and that could conceal a royal burial for eternity? She examined every temple near Alexandria. She eliminated them one by one. Too small, wrong deity, under Roman jurisdiction. Already searched and cleared by previous expeditions, too far to reach in a day, too exposed to Roman surveillance, until she arrived at a single answer: Taposiris Magna. The name itself is a clue most researchers had overlooked. Taposiris Magna translates from ancient Greek as the Great Tomb of Osiris. It was a massive temple complex built around 270 BCE by Ptolemy II, Cleopatra's own ancestor, located 30 miles west of Alexandria along the Mediterranean coast. The temple was dedicated to Osiris, the god of death and resurrection, and his consort Isis, the goddess Cleopatra publicly identified as her divine counterpart. When Martinez presented her theory to Egyptian officials in 2004, they did not believe her. The archaeological establishment had searched for Cleopatra's tomb for generations. The idea that a criminal lawyer from the Caribbean had figured out what they could not was, to put it politely, not taken seriously. Egypt granted her a license to excavate. Within weeks, Martinez found something that silenced every skeptic in the room. Buried beneath the temple floor, she discovered a foundation plate, a rare glass tablet etched with descriptions in both Greek and hieroglyphics. For centuries, archaeologists had searched for this plate at Taposiris Magna and never found it. Martinez found it in her first season. The inscription confirmed that the temple was dedicated to the goddess Isis and had been built by Cleopatra's direct ancestor. She had just proven a direct bloodline connection between the temple and Egypt's last queen. Weeks later, her team uncovered hundreds of bronze coins bearing the face and name of Cleopatra VII. Then coins depicting Mark Antony. Then coins bearing the image of Alexander the Great. The soil at Taposiris Magna was saturated with artifacts from precisely the period when Cleopatra ruled Egypt. And that was just the surface. What lay beneath would take another 18 years to reveal. Between 2005 and 2022, Martinez and her team methodically excavated Taposiris Magna, uncovering layer after layer of evidence that transformed an obscure ruin into one of the most significant archaeological sites in the world. They discovered 21 catacombs. Inside those burial chambers, they found more than 600 human remains and over 30 mummies, many covered in gold leaf, a marker of extreme wealth and status. 2 of those mummies were buried with golden tongues placed inside their mouths, an ancient ritual meant to enable the dead to speak in the afterlife. Think about that. Whoever buried these people believed so strongly in the journey after death that they fitted the dead with literal golden instruments of speech so they could communicate with Osiris in the underworld. These were not peasants. These were members of the ruling elite, buried with the kind of care and expense reserved for royalty. The identity of those mummies has not been definitively established, but their presence confirms that Taposiris Magna was a burial site for the ancient elite during Cleopatra VII's exact time period. And if members of the royal court were buried here, it raises an obvious question. Who else might be entombed in the catacombs that have not yet been opened? The team recovered 337 coins, many depicting Cleopatra's profile. They found statues of the goddess Isis, a bronze ring dedicated to the goddess Hathor, a scarab amulet inscribed with the words, "The justice of Ra has shone." And then, in a moment captured on camera for the National Geographic documentary that would later air worldwide, Martinez carefully lifted from the earth a small white marble bust of a woman wearing a royal diadem. She believes it is a depiction of Cleopatra VII. If confirmed, it would be only the 8th known statue of Egypt's last queen in existence. But the discovery that changed the trajectory of the entire search came in 2022 when ground-penetrating radar and excavation revealed something no one had anticipated: a tunnel. 43 feet beneath the surface of Taposiris Magna, carved directly through solid bedrock, stretching 4,300 feet in length. That is over 1,300 meters. Over 3/4 of a mile of precision-engineered underground passageway, standing 6.5 feet tall, cut with such mathematical accuracy that Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities officially described it as a geometric miracle. Let me put that distance in perspective. If you stood at one end of this tunnel and shouted, no one at the other end would hear you. You could fit more than 14 football fields end to end inside it. Someone carved this through solid rock 2,000 years ago, underground in darkness with hand tools, and they did it with an accuracy that modern engineers acknowledge would be difficult to replicate even today without laser-guided equipment. When Martinez examined the tunnel's design, she recognized it immediately. It was modeled after the tunnel of Eupalinos on the Greek island of Samos, one of the most celebrated engineering achievements of the ancient world, an aqueduct built in the 6th century BCE that carried water for over 1,000 years. The Eupalinos tunnel was famous because it was dug from both ends simultaneously and met perfectly in the middle, a feat of ancient surveying that engineers still study today. Whoever built this tunnel beneath Taposiris Magna possessed knowledge of Greek engineering at its highest level and applied it to create something that was never meant to carry water. It was meant to carry something far more precious. But here is the detail that made Martinez's hands shake. The tunnel did not lead deeper into the temple complex. It headed in one direction, straight toward the Mediterranean Sea. Parts of it were submerged, flooded by centuries of seawater intrusion caused by the same earthquakes that devastated Alexandria. Inside the flooded sections, the team found ceramic jars and pottery dating to the Ptolemaic era, Cleopatra's dynasty. These were not random objects washed in by the tide. They were placed there, used there, by people walking through this tunnel 2,000 years ago. Think about what that implies. A precision-engineered tunnel connecting a temple of Isis built by Cleopatra's ancestor, filled with artifacts from Cleopatra's reign, pointed like an arrow directly at the sea. Martinez's theory was no longer a theory. It was a trail of evidence, and it led underwater. But Martinez faced a problem she could not solve alone. She was an archaeologist, not an oceanographer. She needed someone who could map whatever lay at the end of that tunnel beneath the Mediterranean. So she made a phone call that would bring the most famous underwater explorer in history into the hunt for Cleopatra. Robert Ballard found the Titanic in 1985, 12,000 feet beneath the Atlantic Ocean. He discovered the wreck of the Bismarck, explored hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, and conducted 150 deep-sea expeditions across his career. He is arguably the most accomplished underwater explorer in human history. When Martinez explained what she had found beneath Taposiris Magna and showed him where the tunnel pointed, Ballard agreed to help. Working with the University of New Hampshire and the Egyptian Navy's hydrographic department, he deployed state-of-the-art sonar technology to map the seabed off the coast. What would have taken Martinez's team 5 years to accomplish, Ballard delivered in a single month. and what he found 40 feet beneath the surface of the Mediterranean Sea changed everything. The discovery was announced by the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities in September of 2025, published by National Geographic, and documented in a feature-length film called Cleopatra's Final Secret that aired worldwide. The findings sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. A sunken port, not scattered debris, not random ruins, a complete ancient harbor submerged approximately 2.5 miles from the current coastline, consisting of massive man-made structures rising more than 20 feet from the seafloor, rows of towering columns, some standing over 6 meters high, polished stone floors still intact after 2 millennia underwater, cemented blocks arranged in deliberate architectural patterns, ship anchors scattered across the seabed, and amphorae, the tall ceramic storage jars used throughout the ancient Mediterranean, dated precisely to the time of Cleopatra. Let that sink in for a moment. An entire functioning port, complete with infrastructure for loading and unloading cargo, with floors polished smooth by thousands of feet walking across them, with columns that once held roofing structures, all of it sitting 40 feet underwater, untouched and unseen for nearly 2,000 years. No one in recorded history is known to have ever dived at this location before Ballard's team. The team also discovered stone pockets where ancient fishermen had once stored nets and weights, confirming this area had once been a functioning shoreline. They found basalt-based fragments similar to those from statues inside the sanctuary of Taposiris Magna itself, establishing a direct physical connection between the underwater ruins and the temple on land. Using software to simulate pre-submersion conditions, they reconstructed what the coastline looked like 2,000 years ago, an inner harbor protected by coral reefs, connected directly to Taposiris Magna by the tunnel Martinez had discovered 3 years earlier. And then came a detail that stopped the research team cold. Inside the temple, years earlier, Martinez had found an ancient inscription left by a pilgrim who had visited Taposiris Magna during Cleopatra's era. The inscription was a prayer to Osiris and Isis, thanking the gods for surviving a storm at sea. This was not a landlocked temple. People arrived here by boat. The port was not incidental to the temple, it was essential. This was a site built at the intersection of land and sea, of the mortal world and the realm of the gods, where the tunnel connected earth to water and the living to the dead. The picture that emerged was staggering in its implications. Taposiris Magna was not just a temple, it was a complete infrastructure system designed for the transport of something or someone from the temple to the sea and beyond. A hidden route that bypassed Alexandria entirely. A route that the Romans would never have known existed. Martinez believes this is exactly what Cleopatra intended. After death, the queen's body would have been brought to Taposiris Magna, the temple dedicated to Isis, the goddess she embodied in life. Her remains would have been carried through the underground tunnel over 1,000 meters of concealed passageway to the coastal port. From there, she could have been transported by sea to a hidden burial location, perhaps even entombed within the port complex itself before the earthquakes dragged everything beneath the waves. As Martinez told CBS News, Cleopatra would have done anything to stop her body from falling into Roman hands. Octavian would have paraded her through Rome, dead or alive. By choosing Taposiris Magna, a site outside Roman jurisdiction, connected to her divine identity and equipped with a secret escape route to the sea, Cleopatra ensured that even in death, Rome would never claim victory over her. And here is what makes this discovery truly extraordinary. At least 23 earthquakes struck the Egyptian coast between 320 CE and 1303 CE. The tsunami of 365 CE alone submerged entire sections of Alexandria. Temples collapsed, harbors sank, entire neighborhoods slid into the sea. If Cleopatra's tomb was hidden at or near the port connected to Taposiris Magna, the sea itself became the final guardian of her secret. The Mediterranean swallowed the evidence and kept it hidden for 17 centuries. Here is the part that gives you chills. If Cleopatra chose this location precisely because it sat at the edge of the sea, then the earthquakes and tsunamis that followed did not destroy her plan. They perfected it. The very forces of nature that devastated the rest of Egypt's coastline served as an additional layer of concealment, burying the port beneath 40 feet of water and sediment, sealing the tunnel with seawater, and making the site invisible to every explorer and archaeologist for 2,000 years. It was as if the gods Cleopatra worshipped had taken one final action on behalf of their queen. Until sonar technology advanced enough to peer through those depths and reveal what lay beneath, Cleopatra's secret was absolute. The implications extend far beyond a single tomb. If Martinez is correct, Cleopatra did not simply choose a hiding place. She engineered an entire system of concealment: temple, tunnel, port, and sea. A queen who commanded armies, outwitted senators, and spoke 9 languages spent her final days designing a disappearance so complete that it would take 2,000 years, ground-penetrating radar, deep-sea sonar, and the man who found the Titanic to even begin unraveling it. And here is something that most people miss entirely. The Ptolemaic dynasty that Cleopatra belonged to had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. They were the heirs of Alexander the Great's empire. They built the Library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. They had access to Greek engineering, Egyptian architectural traditions, and centuries of accumulated scientific knowledge. The tunnel beneath Taposiris Magna was not the work of a primitive culture. It was the product of the most educated, most technologically capable civilization on Earth at that time. When the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities called it a geometric miracle, they were not exaggerating. They were acknowledging that ancient engineers accomplished something beneath that temple that would challenge modern construction teams. Think about the logistics for a moment. Carving a tunnel over 4,000 feet long through solid bedrock, 43 feet underground, with a height of 6.5 feet, with precision accurate enough to connect a temple to a seaport over 1 kilometer away, without GPS, without laser levels, without any of the surveying technology we take for granted. That requires mathematics, engineering knowledge, and organizational capability that we simply did not credit the ancient world with possessing. And yet the tunnel exists. It is measurable. It is real. But the story is far from over. Martinez and her team have begun the first ever underwater excavation at the site. Nobody is known to have dived there before. The submerged port has barely been explored. The flooded sections of the tunnel remain partially inaccessible, and Martinez has projected that at least 20 to 25 additional catacombs remain unexcavated at Taposiris Magna itself. Over 1,000 human remains have been recovered so far, but the site's full extent remains unknown. Behind closed doors, researchers are discussing the deployment of technologies that did not exist even a decade ago. Ground-penetrating radar capable of imaging through waterlogged sediment. 3-dimensional sonar mapping that can reconstruct buried architecture without disturbing a single stone. The same Muon imaging technology that detected hidden chambers inside the Great Pyramid of Giza could theoretically be adapted to scan the submerged structures off the coast. The Egyptian Navy's hydrographic department has already been involved in the underwater surveys, signaling that this is no longer a fringe excavation. This is an operation with national support and international attention. Martinez has spent 20 years on this search. She has uncovered a temple connection, a necropolis, a tunnel, and a sunken port. Each discovery has pointed deeper, further, closer. Every piece of evidence has reinforced her central theory, while the archaeological establishment slowly, reluctantly, begins to acknowledge that the criminal lawyer from the Dominican Republic may have been right all along. When she first presented her hypothesis in 2004, officials laughed. She predicted they would find a necropolis from Cleopatra's era. They did. She predicted the temple was dedicated to Isis. It was. She predicted a connection to the sea. They found a tunnel pointing directly at the Mediterranean. She predicted underwater structures. Ballard found a sunken port. At what point do we stop calling this a theory and start calling it a trail of evidence leading to the most important archaeological discovery of the 21st century? The discovery of Cleopatra's tomb Martinez told CNN, will be one of the biggest discoveries of the century. Since the ancient Egyptians speak to us through their tombs, she explained, the queen would have left everything she wanted the world to know about her time, about the way she thought. Think about what that means. For 2,000 years, the only version of Cleopatra we have known is the one written by her enemies. Roman propagandists who called her a seductress, Western historians who reduced her to a love story, Hollywood that turned her into a spectacle. Fewer than 10 statues of her survive because Octavian deliberately destroyed them. The coins bearing her image are some of the few authentic depictions we have. Everything else is filtered through the words of men who conquered her. But if her tomb is found intact, with inscriptions, artifacts, and records preserved by the queen herself, we would hear Cleopatra's own voice for the first time in 2 millennia. We might learn how she actually died. Modern technology could reconstruct her face from her remains. We could finally know what she looked like, not as Roman sculptors imagined her, not as Hollywood cast her, but as she actually was. We would finally know her story as she intended it to be told. And perhaps that is the most remarkable thing about this entire discovery. Not the tunnel, or the sunken port, or the golden mummies, but the possibility that a queen who knew her enemies would rewrite her story took measures to ensure that one day when the right person came looking, the truth would still be there. Waiting beneath the sand, waiting beneath the sea, waiting for someone stubborn enough to believe it existed. Martinez once said, I proclaim myself as the lawyer of Cleopatra for history. History is written by the winner. She has spent 2 decades building a case. And unlike any courtroom she ever stood in, the verdict here is not just about one woman. It is about whether we have the courage to let the defeated finally speak for themselves. Cleopatra reportedly said no man would ever find her tomb. She may have been right about that too. Because it took a woman, a criminal lawyer with no archaeological pedigree, armed with nothing but logic, relentless determination, and the investigative instincts of someone who had spent her career separating truth from lies, to follow the evidence where no one else dared to look. The Mediterranean still holds its secrets. The tunnel still leads into darkness. And somewhere beneath the waves off the coast of Egypt, the last queen of the ancient world may finally be ready to tell her own story. If this deep dive left you wanting more, subscribe and hit notifications. The search beneath the sea is just beginning, and what they find next could rewrite the history of the ancient world. Sometimes the greatest discoveries are not buried in the earth. They are hidden in the places no one thought to look. And sometimes the dead have been waiting 2,000 years for the right person to listen.